Call to order the October 2nd meeting of the Verona Plan Commission. We will begin with the roll call. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Commissioner Manley.
Here.
Mayor Holcomer.
Here.
Commissioner Lytle. Here. Commissioner Heinzen. Here. Commissioner Horsfall and Turk are absent and excused, and we still have one vacancy remaining from the council appointment.
So we have a quorum, and we will proceed with the meeting. Thank you for at least 4 of us being here this evening so we can proceed. Next order of business is approval of minutes from the September 5th meeting of the Plan Commission. Those minutes were included with your packet. What's your pleasure?
Move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Lytle. Any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Just looking ahead on the agenda here this evening, I just want to make sure that everyone's clear. We have 2 public hearings, agenda item number 4 and agenda item number 5. And so for those projects and those projects only, that's the only thing that we're taking any public comment on this evening. If there is additional comment for other matters, we would ask that, or invite you to come to the Common Council meeting next week, Monday, on the 9th at 7 p.m. And there is always a spot on the agenda for public comment. But for this evening, the Plan Commission is conducting the public hearing on agenda items 4 and 5. So if you wish to speak, it has to be on those agenda items and only specific to that topic. So with that, I would accept the motion to open the public hearing for a zoning map amendment and conditional use permit to rezone property located at 841/857 North Main Street from current mixed residential zoning classification to the proposed neighborhood office, and to allow an institutional residential land use that would allow for the construction of an 86-unit senior facility. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Heinzen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lytle. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayre, if you would provide the background, please.
Thank you. This is a request tonight for a rezoning and conditional use permit for 841 North Main Street. The property, as the mayor explained, is zoned mixed residential. The applicant is requesting to rezone the property to neighborhood office so they can construct an 86-unit senior living facility. As part of that, the senior living use is classified as a conditional use in the neighborhood office district and requires a public hearing before the Plan Commission. The zoning map amendment, the rezoning, also requires a public hearing before the Plan Commission, and this is a recommendation tonight on the rezoning and also on the conditional use permit to the Common Council.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, if there's anyone that wishes to provide comment, we'd ask if you'd come to the podium, state your name and address for our benefit and the benefit of those watching at home. And there should be a sign-up sheet there. So is there anyone that desires to speak on this agenda item? Anyone desiring to speak on this specific agenda item? Third and final time, as I always do. Anyone desiring to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lytle. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. On these items, 4A, B, C, and D, A, B, and D would be recommendations to the Common Council, and item 4C is Plan Commission action. Mr. Sayre, anything to add, please?
Thank you. Once again, the property in question is 841 North Main Street. It is highlighted in yellow on the screen before you. The property, as explained previously, is zoned mixed residential. The applicant is requesting a rezone to neighborhood office. This is a project or an area that we've discussed a few times before. The earliest we talked about this was in February 2016 for a proposed 80 to 100 unit senior living facility. That project did not move forward, but did come back for another initial review in May of 17, where the applicant was requesting approximately 120 to 140 units. The concerns were raised by the Plan Commission at that meeting regarding the height of the building and also the number of units. The applicant made revisions, came back to the August Plan Commission meeting once again for initial review to receive feedback on it, and then receive favorable feedback from the Plan Commission in August. The building itself would be set back approximately 60 feet from Main Street, 30 feet from the east property line, 28 feet from the north property line, and 38 feet from the south property line. As part of this project, the applicant will be swapping some property with First Choice Dental on the north side here. So the setback is 28 feet instead of a larger setback. Staff has no concerns with that reduced setback. The ordinance does require a 30-foot setback typically, but they are swapping that land to provide shared parking with First Choice. The applicant has identified a height of the building at 31 feet. The ordinance requires or allows a maximum height of 35 feet, so the building does conform to the maximum height requirements. Access to the site, there'll be 2 access points. The northern access point would be shared with First Choice Dental. The existing access that First Choice Dental has would be closed and shifted slightly to the south. At this new access point, there'd be a dedicated right out and also left out, and also the through lane coming in. People could then make that left-hand turning movement to come in or also to come out of that access point. There'd also be a southern access point as well. The southernmost access point would be restricted to a right in, right out. As part of this project, as I said previously, the applicant would have an easement for First Choice Dental and also for their property along the northern property line. These parking spaces here, which are 11 spaces, would be for First Choice Dental. Also, as part of shifting this driveway to the south, First Choice Dental is gaining in excess approximately 6 more parking spaces as part of that. Staff has no concerns with the access to the property. The project is providing 91 underground parking spaces, and there'll be 28 surface spots. Staff has no concerns with the parking on this site. Actually, myself, the mayor, and the city administrator recently took a tour of Knoll Manor, which has a similar setup to this. And the comment we had from the operator of Knoll Manor was that most of the underground parking is actually empty at that facility. So I think based upon kind of our experience, what we've seen, and also what they're providing on the site, staff feels that the parking for this property is more than sufficient. Stormwater management plans were submitted as part of the project. Stormwater areas are identified in red on the site plan before you. Staff is still going through the plans right now, but currently right now staff has no significant concerns with the actual stormwater plan. The building itself, the applicant is proposing to use high quality materials such as stone and fiber cement siding. The intent is to try to mimic somewhat of the farmhouse look that is currently on the property, but also blend with the residential areas to the east as well. There are some balconies provided on the site plan as well. There's also a large kind of gathering spot on the eastern side of the site too. Staff has no concerns with the proposed materials. It's a nice looking building, and it's similar to the Sienna Ridge apartments, which are located further up on Main Street as well. A detailed landscaping plan was submitted with the project. Significant amounts of landscaping are provided on the southern property line and also on the northern property line. Also, an ample amount of landscaping is provided along the east property line. The applicant is proposing to install that landscaping on the city-owned parcel which is east of this site. Staff has no concerns with that landscaping being installed on city-owned land. Just as a condition of approval, staff would recommend that the applicant needs to enter into an agreement with the city to install that on city-owned property. Further, staff has requested that a path be constructed by the applicant and would be maintained by the city in the city outlot in this location. It would connect the existing North Edge Trail, which currently loops to the east and comes back to the southernmost part of North Edge Trail, and provide a better pedestrian connection for an area that, to be honest, the kids are already walking across in the morning. So staff appreciates the developer working with staff on that. As part of this project as well, the applicant is proposing a certified survey map to create 2 lots. The northernmost lot here would be to First Choice Dental. They're picking up that additional area for those parking spaces, and lot 1 would be left over for the project before you tonight. Staff has no concerns with the CSM. As part of this as well, they are dedicating an additional 38 feet of right-of-way to the city for public purposes. One of the conditions that, if this is approved tonight, staff would recommend on there is actually recording a deed restriction with the property. The applicant has identified this as a senior living project. As part of this, staff would recommend that a deed restriction be recorded on the property, limiting the age restricted housing to persons 55 and older, and a copy of the draft deed restriction was included in your Plan Commission packet. We did go through the rezoning's findings of facts, and we believe that it meets all the requirements. We also went through the conditional use permit findings of facts, and we believe that it does meet the requirements. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission approve the zoning map amendment to rezone 841 North Main Street from the current zoning classification of mixed residential to neighborhood office with the following condition, that the zoning map amendment shall become effective upon Ford Development Group acquiring the property at 841-857 North Main Street. Also, staff recommends, the Plan Commission recommended the Common Council approval of the conditional use permit to allow an institutional residential land use at 841 North Main Street with the following conditions. 1, a deed restriction shall be recorded on the property restricting the use of the property to an indoor institutional residential land use which with age-restricted housing for persons 55 and older after Ford Development Group acquires the property and after the applicant records the certified survey map for the development. And 2, the applicant and the city shall enter into an agreement to allow the applicant to install plantings on public lands and require the applicant to construct a north-south bike pedestrian path connecting North Edge Trail to the city's outlot. For the third item on the agenda, staff recommends the Plan Commission approve the site plan that would allow for the construction of an 86-unit senior living facility at 841 North Main Street. And finally, staff recommends, the Plan Commission recommends the Common Council approval of the certified survey map to create 2 lots at 841 North Main Street. The applicant is here tonight, and they'd be happy to answer any questions from the Plan Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. For Plan Commission members, questions, comments, potential motions? Again, this would be a recommendation to the Common Council. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. A question about the deed restriction. How would the restriction on having 55-year-old residents be monitored and enforced?
Mr. Sayre, please.
That's a good question. It's probably one of those, if the issue comes up and there's a complaint basis, we would explore it at that time. We're not going to require them to submit, applications to us of who the tenants are, but I guess, to be perfectly honest, you hadn't given too much thought to that because I would hope it wouldn't come up, but I would assume we do it on a complaint type basis. If the issue arises, we would handle it that way. That's how we handle most complaints, but I'd be open to thoughts if there's concern.
Mr. Manley?
I don't know if this is the type of project that would require or involve a development agreement with the city. But if it did, you could require the applicant to annually attest to the fact that all of the residents are 55 or older, something along those lines.
Mr. Sayre, would it require a...
No, it would not require a developer's agreement. I mean, if that's a good idea, and I think, depending how other people feel, that's something we could add as part of that condition and easily insert that into the developer or into the deed restriction, a reporting requirement. Not personal information, but obviously just
right.
Age information.
And if I could just follow up, if somebody is in violation of their conditional use, whether it's this conditional use permit that would have a restriction on the age of residents or any element of a conditional use permit, does that allow the city to suspend or revoke the conditional use permit?
Mr. Sayre, please.
We'd have a couple options. One, we could issue citations, or we could go through the revocation process. So that would be an option. Typically, we obviously give them time to correct the violation, but if the violation is not corrected, we could revoke the CUP.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Questions, comments, or motions? Mr. Lytle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To sort of summarize the process around the development of this property, I recall, among other things, the buffer that's included as part of the site plan sprung out of some meetings they had with neighboring property owners. And I don't know whether there was several points where they engaged with the neighborhood in the planning of this property, or whether that was just all done in one meeting or a series of one-on-ones. Can you refresh my memory on that, Adam?
Mr. Sarah, please.
Sure. So they had 2 neighborhood meetings. The first one they had was in March of this year. I think it was sparsely attended, I think, for some notice issues that occurred. So they held the second one on July 11th, and they had a better turnout to that as well. So they've held 2 of them, and they've kind of made some changes to their plans based upon that feedback.
Mr. Lytle?
And just stating the obvious, because this is a public hearing, there were notices distributed to people within a certain radius, which would include neighboring property owners of this occurring this evening.
Correct. So we do send out mail notices to anyone within 200 feet of the property. We also posted public hearing signs on the property. I had 2 or 3 or 4 calls regarding the public notice signs on the property, just people inquiring kind of what was going on, and directed them off to the website to where the plans were, and I didn't hear back.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments or motions? Mr. Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one comment, and it's consistent with, I guess, the other comments that I've made on this proposal from the beginning. I really like the project. I think it's needed. I think the need for senior housing and assisted senior care is going to grow. It's not going to diminish over time, and I like the way the building looks. I really like everything about it except where it's located. And I think from a zoning standpoint and from a planning standpoint, our North Main Street corridor should be reserved for commercial as opposed to residential or institutional. And so in just about any other place in the city other than this, I would be highly supportive of this project. But I believe very strongly that our Main Street corridor and our Verona Avenue corridor should be reserved for commercial land uses, and for that reason only, I'm going to oppose the rezoning.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other questions, comments, or motions? Mr. Lytle, please.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion that we recommend the Common Council approve the zoning map amendment for the property at 841 North Main Street from mixed residential to neighborhood office, subject to the condition of the zoning map amendment becoming effective upon their acquisition of the property.
We have a motion by Mr. Lytle. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments on the motion? Questions or comments? Seeing none, the motion before you is to recommend approval to the Common Council with the condition. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
And that motion carries. Mr. Manley voting no. We are on agenda item 4B, which is discussion and possible action. It would be a recommendation to the Common Council on a conditional use permit to allow for institutional residential land use to be located at 841 North Main Street that would allow for the construction of an 86-unit senior living facility. Questions, comments, or potential motions? Questions, comments, or motions? Mr. Heinzen?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manley has raised a good question, I think, with respect to the deed restriction. And I think my uncertainty or concern is a little bit different than Mr. Manley's, but I'm wondering whether or not this is a question that needs to be asked of City Council, or legal counsel, rather, because I don't know, if it was just a deed restriction, I'm not sure exactly if the city would have any standing to challenge the deed, because it won't be a party to that contract, essentially, the sale. So I'm not sure. There may be a better way to go about ensuring that the age limit is maintained. I'm just not so sure that deed restriction is the way to go about it. Aside from that, I'm fine with the rest of this item. I'm not sure how we would want to deal with that.
Mr. Sayre?
Yeah, regarding the deed restriction, that was actually advice that came from our legal counsel, as that was the kind of way he recommended we actually handle it. I think regarding Mr. Manley's kind of comment about the reporting of it, that I don't have a good answer on, of how we can, if there's a desire to incorporate that. There probably is, but no, legal counsel advised us the best way of doing that was to actually have them record a deed restriction on the property.
That satisfies me.
Mr. Manley?
Thanks.
Is there any reason why we couldn't include a condition in the conditional use permit that prohibits those units from being rented to somebody under the age of 55, and further require the conditional use permit holder to annually attest to the city that they're meeting that requirement?
Mr. Sayre, please?
Yeah, the intent of the deed restriction from our city attorney was that it's then recorded on the property, and then anyone who buys this in the future, when they go to buy it, we'll do a title search on it, and this will come up every single time. So the intent was, that was why it was not a condition of approval, because sometimes those, for better or for worse, could get lost in the shuffle 20, 30 years from now. I think the reporting, I think there's a way we can incorporate language into the deed restriction for the reporting, or I think if, even tonight, if you want to just place a condition on, an additional condition on this, that the applicant shall report to the city annually for compliance with the age, the housing requirement, the age of the housing requirement, that would be, something along those lines would be fine as well. But I think we can probably get something into the deed restriction. I don't think that'd be a problem.
To be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the deed restriction, but I think Mr. Heinzen raises a good point that deed restrictions are a matter between a property owner and the, I guess the governing body that oversees, whether it's a neighborhood association or whomever it is, and not the city. So if the city wants to maintain an interest in ensuring that those requirements are being met, it seems to me that putting something in the conditional use permit would be a good way to do it.
Mr. Sayre, please?
I'd be fine with that. My only recommendation would be to do both, but I think it's fine.
Mr. Heinzen, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not to make this more complicated than it is already, but I'm going to jump ahead to a moment when there's a violation. And what happens if, I think it's worthwhile knowing if we're going to put some restriction in, that we know what the city would do in the event that that restriction was violated. And if we have a conditional use permit and we discover that there's a 40-year-old living in the apartment building who's signed a 2-year lease, what can the city be? How do you withdraw a conditional use permit on a building that has so many residents already in it? Is that even practical to try to do that?
Mr. Sayre, please?
I think it's practical. Part of the reason for that condition is just based upon, typically if this was an apartment complex, you'd have different parking standards on this property. You'd have a lot more parking on it. How would you potentially go about resolving that? I think it's probably the courts, for better or for worse. I think it's probably some type of, you're going to file in the courts and, I guess work with the applicant first and see if you can work through it. But I mean, you're probably in the courts of potentially either voiding out the CUP or who knows.
Mr.
But it's a
Heinzen?
valid question to raise, because most likely if this is in place in 30 years, it's not going to be an issue in 5 years. It's going to be an issue in 30, 40 years.
Yeah. Mr. Henshaw has made his way to the front, so Ron, if you would, please.
Good evening. Ron Henshaw with Ford Development Group. Just a couple of comments that maybe will make the issue a little easier to resolve. I mean, we have no issues with placing a restriction on the deed. It's designed as a senior housing project. What I want to highlight is, we have memory care units in there, we have assisted living units, and we have independent living units. If you take a look at the design of the property itself as it relates to the floor plans and how it's laid out, is not easily convertible to a market rate multifamily type project, you would need to do significant renovation to do that. In addition to that, the rates that are charged for the independent living, assisted living, and or memory care are significantly greater. To be honest with you, I can't imagine a situation where there is a 40-year-old who needs a one-bedroom apartment and they're going to choose to come into a senior living facility at 3 to 4 times, or whatever the number would be, rate that is out there available in the general market. So it's the design of the property itself basically requires such that it be senior housing versus any other type of housing. So you'd have to go through a renovation to convert it, and the deed, I believe, would restrict it such that nobody would do that and incur that cost to use it in any other capacity other than senior housing, if that's helpful. Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, other questions or comments? Potential motions? Mr. Lytle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am curious if this is more of a solution in search of a problem. I wasn't aware of any reporting that's been done elsewhere in the city or complaints that have been filed for properties that were designated as senior living being converted without the city's permission. If that is the case, I'd like to know in a general sense whether there are concerns that we should be addressing with this CUP.
Mr. Sayre, please.
I know of one in the city, and I won't identify it, but I know of one in the city where a couple of years ago an issue was raised with it. And the issue that was raised was when it was originally approved, I want to say back in the 70s or 80s, that it was approved with some conditions that it was supposed to remain senior, and it didn't. And there was a concern that that it was approved that way initially. We couldn't find any conditions. We went back through the minutes and we looked for it. Went back how many years, multiple meetings, and couldn't find anything. But there were some people that were pretty confident that was the case, and we couldn't find any documentation of it. So I think, because of that, as going forward when we see these projects, I'd like to kind of start, if we're approving it as a senior project, at least better documentation from our standpoint of making sure that's the intent when we approve it, and that's the intent going forward as well. So that's the only one that I'm aware of, but I know it was an issue for a few months there of either miscommunication or confusion over the years, but it was an issue a couple of years ago.
Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. I think that the question of restricting this to an elderly population isn't a trivial one for a number of important reasons. One of them being the concerns that I had raised initially when we first saw this project about the traffic impacts to an already incredibly congested North Main Street during drop-off and pickup for Badger Ridge, Cornolledge, and the high school. I think are significant, but I'm persuaded that because the explanation was given that the vast majority of these residents are not going to be driving, if any of them are driving at all, that the traffic impact would be minimal. The other thing is that if I understand the neighborhood office zoning district correctly, if you are using that land for institutional purposes, the maximum density is 50 units per acre. If you're using it just for regular residential purposes, it's 5 units per acre. So if you're just renting this out to somebody off the street, this parcel, based on its size of almost 3 acres, would suggest that you could have 15 people total living there, as opposed to the 86 that are proposed. So I think to ensure that zoning is met, there has to be some way to restrict this to an institutional use.
Other questions or comments? If not, let me give this a shot. I'm going to make a motion to approve the conditional use permit to allow for an institutional land use to be located at 841 North Main Street that would allow for the construction of an 86-unit senior living facility. With condition number 1, a deed restriction shall be recorded on the property restricting the use on the property to an indoor institutional residential land use with age-restricted housing for persons age 55 and older. And after development group acquires the property and the applicant records a certified survey map for development. Second condition, that the applicant and the city shall enter into an agreement to allow the applicant to install plantings on public lands and to be required the applicant to construct a north-south bike pedestrian path connecting North Edge Trail and the city's outlot. And the third condition, to direct the city staff to work with the city's legal counsel prior to Monday's council meeting to have language drafted that would restrict the property to the use of 55 and older. That's my motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion by myself, seconded by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments on that motion? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We are on agenda item 4C, which would be approval by Plan Commission. Questions, comments, or motions? Mr. Lytle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll recommend approval, the Plan Commission approval of the site plan that allow the construction of 86-unit senior living facility, 841 North Main Street.
We have a motion by Mr. Lytle. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments on that motion? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We are on agenda item 4D, which is discussion and possible action. It would be a recommendation to the Common Council on a certified survey map to create 2 lots at 841, 857 North Main Street. Questions, comments, motions? Questions, comments? Mr. Lytle?
Thank you. I will make a motion that we recommend the Common Council approve the certified survey map to create the 2 lots at 841 North Main Street.
We have a motion by Mr. Lytle. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. Questions or comments on that motion? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are now ready for a public hearing on agenda item number 5, which is for a general development plan for a planned unit development, a PUD, to be located at 118 South Main Street and 108 Park Lane, that would allow for a mixed-use development that would contain 21,930 square feet of commercial space and 52 apartments. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Mr. Sayre, if you'd provide the background, please.
Thank you. This is a public hearing tonight for a general development plan. The plan development process is a 4-step process. Step 1 is a meeting with staff. Step 2 is a concept review before the Plan Commission and Common Council. This project went before the Plan Commission and Common Council in February of this year. Step 3, which is the step that we're in tonight, is the general development plan. Public hearing is required before the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the Common Council. Step 3 is where the zoning entitlements are granted. And then step 4 is the precise implementation plan. Once again, there's a public hearing held before the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the Common Council, and if approved by the Common Council, then the project can start construction. So tonight we are in the step 3 phase of the plan development process, which requires the public hearing for the Plan Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. So at this point, we are in the public hearing for agenda item 5. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item during public comment? Mr. Ankard?
Good evening, Mike Hankard, 100 Park Avenue. I live, 1 or 200 yards from this project, and overall I'm in favor of it. I think it's great. I would make 2 comments. One is, as part of my work, I'm a noise engineer, and I deal with mixed-use projects quite a bit. And you put up an apartment complex overlooking, say, the roof of a medium-sized grocery store, and people move in and don't like the HVAC equipment that runs 24/7 or the deliveries that come at 7:05 a.m. I guess I don't know if it's a deed restriction or what mechanism you use, but the people that move in have to realize what they're getting themselves into, that there's existing businesses and things there right in the middle of, and if you want to be in the middle of it, well, you got to be in the middle of it, and that was there first. Secondly, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think there's some TIF money or some sort of public assistance part of this project, and I guess I'd like it explained to me, not right now, but just why is this a good investment of public funds? I understand if you're trying to develop in a place like, I don't know, Detroit, or my wife's hometown up in northern Wisconsin is a little thin, and some developer came there and you need to give them some money to get them to come in and get over the hump. Great, I understand that, but this is Verona. It's like the hottest address in Wisconsin. We're we're 3 times the growth rate of Dane County. So I guess I wouldn't understand why we'd be handing out public money without a good reason to do so. Again, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm for the project, and if there's a good use of TIF money and you tell me as my representatives that this is a good use of my tax money, then great. But please give it some good thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak this evening? Anyone else desiring?
Hi, Nicole Austin, 112 Pinehurst Court, Verona. I also am for the project. I've been a lifelong Verona resident and waited a long time to actually say we have a downtown, so we're pretty excited, and I know a lot of people are. My main concern tonight that I wanted to discuss was the look of the project that was presented. I know I've shared a few emails with Adam, and he said there's been some possible changes to the initial proposal. I guess what I'm hoping for, and I know I share this voice of several others in Verona, is having a downtown that looks like it's got some character and charm and an older kind of feel. And the look on the photos I've seen is super modern, contemporary, almost cold. It seems like a high-rise. Initially reminded me of the Regent Apartments downtown. I guess what I was looking at, I happened to be driving through Waunakee over the summer, and I really liked what they had done. They had built brand new buildings to look older. They're very charming, and it's similar in size. I think they're 3 stories high as well. Storefronts and restaurants below, apartments above. Just a totally different feel, though. I just think right now is the time to do it right. So if we make it look more timeless and charming, like an old downtown, then we'd be in the right direction. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak under public comment? Anyone else desiring to speak? If you would, please.
I'm Sandy Schwab. I live at 105 South Marietta Street in Verona, which is in the next block from this proposed project. And I agree with the last speaker that we really need to get it right this time. The 2 buildings that are there have been eyesores from when they were built. We've got, those ugly metal buildings and big parking lots that really were very underutilized. I think Verona has, I've been here 30 years, we have lacked a vision for a cohesive look for our downtown. And this is another chance, and I hope we get it right this time. And my other comment is about traffic. This summer, with the Main Street construction, we had stop signs at Schumann and Park Lane, South Park Lane, which really helped improve the safety of that intersection. That was just a temporary stop signs. But I think it's very important for Schumann to have permanent stop signs if you've got 54 apartment buildings on that block, but also because that's also a loading dock area for Carl Miller store. There's a lot of delivery trucks that park on Schumann, And if you are in a car and you're trying to cross Park Lane, you can't even see around the parked vehicles. In this, you know, this also leads to my other disappointment with Verona is I think we really need to focus on projects being pedestrian friendly. A lot of times it's really hard to cross Main Street, and I cross Main Street a lot, being my neighborhood. But the new improvements on Main Street have somewhat improved your ability to cross safely without a narrow miss from a car. But people are focused on the stoplights down on Verona on the Main Street there, and they just want to shoot on by, whether it's on Main Street or on Verona Ave, and it is very difficult to cross or to feel comfortable even trying to cross. And I think if we really want to develop our downtown, we've got to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else desiring to speak this evening? Anyone else desiring to speak? Going the third and final time. Anyone else desiring to speak? Okay, just a comment on the bike and pedestrian friendly. And our council agrees with you, and we have approved, it's over $4 million worth of bike and pedestrian improvements in the city in the next couple of years. So that's quite significant, so we take that serious. Seeing no other comments, a motion to close the public hearing would be in order. We have a motion by Mr. Lytle. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. The applicant has requested general development plan approval to construct two mixed-use buildings at 118 South Main Street and 108 Park Lane. This is the sites of the former World of Variety and former Ace Hardware. The background of this is in February of 2017, a concept plan was submitted by the applicant, which included 18,000 square feet of commercial space and 55 apartment units. Comments from staff at that time included a desire for additional brick material to match typical downtown projects and a desire to see the 4 stories step back. Staff also stated of great importance is creating high quality project that has exceptional level of architectural detail and design, as this project will help anchor future additional redevelopment in the downtown. Comments from the Plan Commission included 4-story buildings are too tall for Main Street, and a 3-story building would be better. There's also concern there's too much density with relation to other projects going on in the city. In general, the Plan Commission was supportive of redeveloping the property, but requests the building be broken up more and variation in the elevations. The Common Council also reviewed the project in February of 2017. Comments from the Common Council included questions about the project's density, a desire to locate as much of the parking underground as possible, and concerns about the building's design. Once again, the project itself is located in yellow on the screen before you. The proposed project would be broken into 2 different buildings. You'd have one building fronting along Main Street and the other building fronting along Schumann and Verona Avenue. The property does conform to all the setback requirements of the Central Commercial District. Access to the site, the applicant would utilize the existing access off of Verona Avenue and would also utilize the existing access off of Main Street. One new access point would be provided along Park Lane, and the existing access on Schumann will be closed as part of this project. Staff has no concerns with the access at this time. One item to note is that Miller's has delivery just south of this point, so most likely what will happen is the trucks will come in to this location here, then back into Miller's loading dock, and the applicant is aware of that. The applicant is proposing 107 parking spaces, and that includes 50 surface spaces and 58 underground spaces. For each building, there is 1 parking space per unit, which is typical or what we require for any apartment project in the city. Staff doesn't have any concerns with parking at this time. One thing that we did request as part of this project was additional right-of-way dedication, and the applicant has provided that. Along Verona Avenue, we requested additional 20 feet for the future expansion of the road, and we also requested an additional 15 feet along Main Street to provide additional right-of-way in the future for the potential expansion of Main Street. As part of this as well, the applicant is proposing pedestrian sidewalks along the entire project. One item to note is staff would recommend this pedestrian sidewalk here have a better connection across the actual parking lot itself. Currently, it just kind of dumps into the parking lot. So to provide that connection, it'd be better to have this kind of traverse the entire site versus just stopping here. Some of the comments I think we just heard regarding pedestrian safety, as the mayor indicated, we are looking at a bike and pedestrian plan throughout the entire city. There are potential future improvements along Verona Avenue, especially east of the site and west of this site. I believe that's in the plan. I'm not exactly sure on the timing of those improvements, but those would potentially involve bumping out the sidewalk to make safer pedestrian crossings, potentially the flashing lights that you see kind of elsewhere in the city as well too. So we are in the process of looking at that. And I will share the concern about the stop signs with the police department and public works director tomorrow, and just let them know about your comments regarding that. So I'd be happy to do that. Back to the project itself. This was the design that the Plan Commission and Common Council saw in February of 2017. We did receive the submittal for this Plan Commission meeting about a month ago. This was the submittal from a month ago. The building was approximately 50 feet tall, and the floor was stepped back. Staff did provide the applicant with comments on the building along South Main, and they did revise the plans based upon our comments. Once again, the building is stepped back. The fourth floor of the building is stepped back. The height would still be 50 feet. For the building that's on Verona Avenue in Schumann, that building would be 30 feet tall. The applicant is using fiber cement siding, metal railings on the South Main building, and then 3 different colors of bricks, as well as some EIFS for the signage area as well. This property is located within the downtown overlay district. The intention of that district is to take advantage of the gateway to Verona aspect of the of the Verona Avenue and Main Street. I just kind of want to point that out, as this is a very prominent project that will be very visible in the city. Especially, it'll be quite the difference of what's out there right now. So staff has provided the applicant with some the comments. The applicant did make some changes to the South Main Street building. Some of our comments were along the lines of some of the public comments we heard tonight, of trying to add more detail to the building, trying to make it more of a historic type looking building. For the building along Verona Avenue and Schumann, trying to provide that corner as a prominent location, as that will be a focal point as people travel east on Verona Avenue, and just to further draw people into the site. In general, staff remains supportive of redeveloping this property. I think one thing that we can't emphasize enough is how important it is to have an exceptional level of architectural design and detail on this project. This will be a very highly visible project that will serve as the gateway to downtown, and it should be considered a legacy project as we kind of look at this. It's of that importance in our mind. We do appreciate the attempts by the developer to make revisions to the plans as well. We also appreciate the developer coming forward and assembling the property as well. That takes a lot of work too. However, as the project is presently designed, staff believes that it misses the mark. The applicant has made improvements to design based upon comments from staff, but additional changes are necessary to gain staff support. Specifically, staff has encouraged the applicant to review the redevelopment that has occurred in Waunakee, similar to what the person referenced tonight. Waunakee has done, I think, a great job of preserving their downtown character while allowing infill development. I think just as you kind of look at what they've done, a lot of these buildings are new, but they don't look new. I mean, a lot of our history in our downtown has been removed over the years. We still have the Matt's House. We have some older buildings that are still there that probably need some care and love. But we have an opportunity here to do something that would give us additional character and kind of provide a higher level of quality, because this will be one of the most visible projects we have in the city. So staff believes that we support the redevelopment of these properties, but we have enough of concerns about the design of the project. The staff recommends the Plan Commission postpone action tonight and direct the applicants to make some additional changes to the design. Our recommendation would be to look at the projects occurring in Waunakee, looking at varying the roof line of the project, looking at additional architectural details around the windows, sills, anything that kind of give the building more character and give it more of that look, the historic type look that you typically would see in your downtown. So that staff recommends the Plan Commission postpone action on the general development plan for the Verona Avenue and Main Street mixed-use residential plan and direct the applicant to make changes to the building design to provide a more historic, older-looking building. The applicant is here tonight, and they'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Questions, comments, or potential motions? Questions, comments, motions? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I would say that I agree with what Adam said with respect to the design of the buildings. I think that when I look at the latest iteration of it, compared to what we saw back in February, substantial improvements have been made. No question about it. Definitely headed in the right direction. But I agree that I'd like to see something that looks a little bit more like it belongs in a downtown Verona, sort of hometown USA flavor to it. I also believe that both of the buildings from a architectural and appearance standpoint should be complementary of each other. And so the idea of having one building on that fronts Main Street that looks one way, looks a certain way, and then the other building that goes along Verona Avenue and Schumann looking, substantially different. I don't think that's the direction we should go. So with that, I'd be supportive of the staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other comments, motions? Just my comment, I couldn't agree more with what Mr. Sayre and Mr. Manley have indicated. I'm not one for delaying projects for the sake of delaying projects, but I think by delaying this one and doing more work with the developer, we can come up with something better than what we currently have here. Not that this is bad, but most of these, those of you that have been around and have heard me for a while, usually you get a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make positive changes. This corner has seen something more than once, but I would really like to see us get it right this time. And I think that additional work could be done. Also, most people know that I'm concerned that as a region that we're overbuilding on multifamily, but if we want our downtown to thrive, this is important that we have this type of development in the downtown area. So I will support the multifamily, but I would like to see us come back and have something a little bit more along the lines of what Mr. Sayre was saying. Mr. Lytle, please.
Thank you. I think you're probably going to hear unanimous opinions from the Plan Commission around support of the project overall, but a desire to see something that does reflect what the other speakers have said in terms of, I think there is a balance between having a particular focus on the face that is towards Main Street and giving you all some flexibility for the other building that is on West Verona and Schumann. I think there's ways to tie the two buildings together without having identical architecture. The one thing I want to clarify or have clarified is without a council representative here on Plan Commission, will the applicants be able to get feedback from council next week with the Plan Commission deferring action, or are there options to make sure that would happen?
Mr. Sayre?
Actually, the mayor was just asking me that question. If it's postponed, it would not go to the common council. I mean, you could postpone and direct it to the council for feedback. I don't think we want to start making that a habit, but I mean, that's something that we could do as well. That is an option.
Go ahead, Mr. Lytle.
Just my follow-up would be, I think we're in what is hopefully a temporary and extraordinary situation with not having a council rep here. So my hope would be that we would consider making that exception here and allowing them to have a combined set of feedback from Plan Commission and Council.
Mr. Sarah, anything to add?
No, I'm fine with that. Just I'd be curious thoughts of anyone else in the Plan Commission.
Mr. Hanson?
Excuse me, thank you. No, I agree with Mr. Lytle. I think that particularly given, as everyone has recognized here, this is a very, very important parcel in the city. To have the city council, when there's no one here representing the city council, would be valuable, I think, to us as well as to the applicant. So I think it's a good idea.
I'm just chuckling to myself because I am a representative of the city council as mayor, so it's, I know a lot of people tell me I'm not important, but I am part of the council, so. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Sarah that we don't want to make, a practice of doing this all the time to the council, and it's none of our issues around here at the table why we don't have an alderperson on the Plan Commission. We all desire that to be the case, but the council has not moved in that direction. So we will put it on the agenda for the council meeting. Other questions, comments, or motions? We do not have a motion before us at this time. Mr. Manley?
I guess if I'm understanding everybody correctly, we would want to make a motion to defer action on this and ask the developer to come back with changes, or just do nothing.
I think what I heard from Mr. Heinzen and from Mr. Lytle was that we put it in front of the Common Council for their input. So it would be on the agenda. So we could potentially, as a Plan Commission, we could postpone action, but still forward it on to the Common Council.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out in my mind what that motion looks like. So I would move that we defer action, encourage the applicant to come work with city staff on further changes and forward to the Common Council for additional review.
That works.
So moved.
That works. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Again, just so I get caught up. That was Manley and Heinzen, was it?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So now we are on agenda item number 6, which is no action. Discussion and possible action regarding initial review for a proposed 8,125 square foot building to be located at 529 Commerce Parkway. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting initial review of a proposed 8,125 square foot building to be located at 529 Commerce Parkway. The lot in question is highlighted in orange on the screen before you. The proposed building would be located in this dashed location here. There is a parking lot in front of the site as well. It would be set back approximately 75 feet from Commerce Parkway and 79 feet from the rear property line, and then would also conform to all the required setbacks. The intent of the applicant is to use the building as an indoor maintenance building. He has some vehicles that he's personally maintains, so it wouldn't be open for commercial. It would just be for the maintenance of the vehicles that he owns and has. Parking on the site, the applicant is providing 5 surface parking spaces in the lot itself. Typically, the ordinance would require 27 parking spaces for this type of use, which in our opinion is quite excessive for what the applicant is using it as. The applicant has indicated that typically there's a couple people in there working on the vehicles, so at most there'd be a need for 5 spaces on the site. Staff has no concerns with the parking on the property. Access to the site would be provided from Commerce Parkway. The applicant has indicated semi-trucks will pull into the property, so they'll actually pull into the site and into the building and unload and then back out into Commerce Parkway. The only thing staff would encourage the applicant, instead of backing out in the Commerce Parkway, is actually to try to back into the property itself. The building itself, the applicant is proposing to use a pre-engineered one-story metal building. Just a couple comments that staff has provided the applicant. Staff would recommend the applicant consider additional windows in the front of the building, similar to the other facades, and also consider putting some type of stone or brick material along the base of the building, just to break up the building itself and just give it a little more definition and character. This is a low volume street. It's a loop street that loops back onto Nine Mound, so it connects on Nine Mound in the west and the east. So there's not much traffic back here, but any additional character to the building would be appreciated from staff standpoint. As part of this, the applicant is looking at a 2-lot CSM. Lot 1 would contain this building. It's approximately 1 acre in size. And outlot 1 would be the remaining remnant piece and would be labeled on the CSM as non-buildable, except for the existing structures on the property. The reason for that label is that it's actually going to be landlocked, and it's also encompassed by some significant floodplains and wetlands that are on the property. The intent long-term of the current owner is potentially taking that outlot in a future CSM and dividing it basically straight down the existing lot lines that are in this plat. Those are multiple property owners, so that conversation will have to occur with the current property owner, but to keep this project moving forward, the applicant is looking at just creating this one lot to accommodate this use. So that staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council approval of the certified survey map, and staff also recommends the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. The site plan itself would have to come back here at a future meeting for approval, but the applicant has requested to move forward with the CSM to help facilitate their closing and acquisition of the property. And I believe the applicant is here tonight, and he'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, Adam, you mentioned, did you say that this property has multiple owners, and that lot 1 will have a single owner and the outlot 1 will have more than one owner?
No, it's not. So it's complicated. So this is currently lot 28. Lot 28 is the line on the screen before you, and it actually goes through the buildings that's on lot 29 and 30. So what they're looking at doing is basically splitting this existing lot 28, moving it off of where it kind of overlaps onto that building right now, and then creating this outlot, which would be retained. The person who owns 29, 30, and 28 would retain ownership of outlot 1. So this would be owned by the current owner of the property. This area would be owned by the current owner of the property, and this would be owned by the applicant itself, who's here tonight. So the red area in the CSM, that would be owned by the applicant who's before you're here.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Heinzen.
There's common ownership then, so that outlot 1, if the owner of these lots wanted to, outlot 1 would have access to Commerce Parkway, because at least with the understanding that all those lots are owned by the same individual.
Mr. Sarah, please.
Outlot 1 would have access through this kind of area through here, because it's all owned by the same individual through here.
Other questions or comments? Other questions or comments? We weren't looking for any action on this agenda item tonight, but we would be on the next agenda item. Agenda item 7, which would be discussion and possible action and a recommendation to the Common Council on a certified survey map to create 1 lot and 1 outlot at 529 Commerce Parkway. Questions, comments, or potential motions? Questions, comments? Mr. Heinzen, please.
I'll move that we recommend the common council approve the certified survey map. I think it's the,
So we need- yep. We have a motion by Mr. Heinzen. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. Questions or comments on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion carries. We are now on agenda item number 8, which we are looking at no action this evening. And that is initial review for a 100-room hotel and a 5,000 square foot restaurant to be located at 509 West Verona Avenue. Mr. Sayre, if you provide the background, please.
Thank you. The applicant is requesting initial review for proposed 100-unit hotel and 5,000 square foot restaurant on West Verona Avenue. The site in question is highlighted on your screen in red. The site is immediately east of the existing St. Vincent de Paul and west of the Sugar Creek Commons development, which was approved last month at the Plan Commission and Council meeting. The site plan, the building itself, the restaurant would be 1 story. It would be about 5,000 square feet and be fronting along West Verona Avenue. The hotel would be immediately south of the restaurant, be 4 stories in height, and have approximately 100 rooms in the hotel. The restaurant would be set back approximately 15 feet from West Verona Avenue. I think initially staff has no concerns with the building placement for this project. The applicant is proposing 145 surface parking spaces, which is depicted on the site plan. There is additional shared parking potentially with the Sugar Creek Commons project to the east and potentially with St. Vincent de Paul to the west. Staff has no concerns with the proposed parking on the property. The applicant is proposing 2 access points into this area. The one access point would be from where the Sugar Creek Commons project was approved, and also there'd be one to the west, west of the restaurant as well. One comment from staff regarding the access has been to actually recommend the westernmost access point be closed. So the applicant is looking at this shared access with Sugar Creek Commons, and this is the second one they've requested. Staff has asked for this one to be closed and have a shared access with the St. Vincent de Paul site. Those 2 access points are in very close proximity to each other, and our preference would be to have that shared just from a public safety standpoint and also to avoid confusion as well. The building itself, the applicant it's a very schematic type design. The applicant is proposing a building that would be 4 stories in height, would have stone or a brick type material on it as well. There were no conceptual elevations submitted for the restaurant. It was indicated that would be a 1-story building. I guess staff's comment on the 1-story building is that we'd recommend it being at least 2 stories, or at least having the appearance of being 2 stories. So that's one change that we've encouraged the applicant to make. I think from a design standpoint, as we've looked at the hotel itself, we would recommend an additional detail and character to kind of better blend with the Sugar Creek Commons project to the east. I don't think we don't have any concerns over the 4-story aspect of it. I think the bigger concern is just making sure the design complements what we recently approved to the east and fits with that design. I think currently as designed, it could use some changes to it to have a better fit and feel to the Sugar Creek Commons project. So with that, staff is supportive of the redevelopment of this property. It would be in conjunction with the Sugar Creek Commons project, but additional design details are necessary in order for us to provide a full review of the project, but we are supportive of redeveloping this site. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. I know the applicant is here tonight, and they'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, questions or comments? Again, as we indicated previously, we're not looking at taking any action this evening from the Plan Commission. Questions or comments? Mr. Lytle, please.
I think it's, based on the information we have at this point, a project I'll look forward to supporting. I believe I would want to echo Adam's comments around trying to connect it design-wise with the property to the east. I guess one question for Adam, I know very early on in this process there was discussion that the hotel might include some sort of banquet center, but that is no longer the case, or did I dream that up originally?
Mr. Sarah, please.
No, I believe that was contemplated at one point, but that has now been modified and changed. They have the separate standalone restaurant building and then have the hotel behind it. But that, yes, that was a consideration at one point.
Yeah. More specific to your comment about the height of the restaurant, I think I would agree that a building that at least had the appearance of being 2 stories, and whether that's through some sort of facade, shielding, mechanicals, that kind of thing, I think I'd be willing to consider that as a way to add some bulk to that building as well.
Other questions or comments for Mr. Sayre or the applicant? Other questions or comments? I would just say that as far as, we're maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but as far as the exterior of the building, we certainly would want to see something at least to the quality of what we've seen with the other 2 hotels on West Verona Avenue. Any additional feedback? If not, I would just suggest to the applicant, continue working with staff, and we look forward to you bringing this project back. Thank you. We are on agenda item 9, which again is no action this evening. It's discussion regarding the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. I was pausing to wait, making sure Jason Valerius was arriving, and he has. So, so on the agenda before you tonight is discussion regarding the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. We obviously talked about the plan at the last Plan Commission meeting. The project was also discussed by the Common Council as well. In your packet, Jason Valerius has prepared a memo kind of outlining some of the comments and items for the Plan Commission to consider tonight. I also did, I think, email the Plan Commission a few emails that I've received. I also have some information here from the developer of the Legends Edge project that I can pass out if the Plan Commission would like to see that. That's available if you want me to pass that out. But with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Jason, and I'll put the presentation up, and we can go from there.
Jason, nice to see you.
Thank you. Good night. Good evening. The presentation isn't necessarily a presentation per se. It's some resources to support our the memo. The memo that I provided to you describes some the issues that came up in discussion with council, and suggests some alternative policy options that you could consider as variants from the draft that we've been working with in response to those concerns. So short of reading this thing line by line, let me give you the overview. The 3 topics that really came up and were discussed back on September 11th were not surprisingly height and density is probably one of the key issues that came up and was discussed. The second was green space and allowance for a good Ice Age trail corridor. And then the third issue that we saw come up several times was questions and discussion on the issue of affordable housing. So starting with the question of development height and density, as a reminder, what we've got right now in the draft plan is that in the medium density residential area, the baseline limits would be 12 units per acre and up to 35 feet in height, and that there would be allowance given for up to 18 units per acre and 65 feet, and likewise in the commercial mixed use baseline of 65 feet in height with allowance for up to 100, and units per acre allowed to go up to 50. So we have a couple suggestions for how you might consider changing the draft to reach something that would be adoptable, approvable by council. So our first was that you could simply eliminate the bonuses entirely. You would revert back to the baseline, which would be 12 units 35 and 15 units 65 in those two areas. The second is that you could keep the bonuses but reduce them so that instead of a total height of 100, it would be down to 65 with a baseline of 45 in that mixed use area, and the top height in the medium density residential would be 45 instead of 65. And then a third suggestion we have, and this isn't really mutually exclusive from the others, is that you could consider remaining silent on the question of density. My opinion is that the issue of height is an important one that's worth taking into account in the plan, but that density is a number that, as I say in here, is kind of a poor measure of the quality of the neighborhood that you end up with, and so you might consider not focusing on that number and focusing instead simply on height. I think at this point, let me pause and invite some comments and questions and discussion on the issue of height and density in this plan.
Questions or comments for Jason? Jason, first question that I have is on the height, is where are we getting the number from, the 45 or 65 versus 100? Are you taking that from what other municipalities are doing, or where does that come from?
Sure. So it's not derived from a common practice per se. It was more about looking at some comparable buildings, and this would be a good time to queue up those photos. So I've got a series of images here to illustrate in a rough manner. I don't have the exact heights of these buildings, but Adam will just click through them here. So this is a 35-foot building roughly here in town, the hotel on the west side. Next one is roughly a 45-foot building. This is residential building south of downtown, or in downtown, and so about 4 stories. Next one is a building that many are probably familiar with on Monroe Street. This is a 5-story building that's, I would estimate, 65 to 70 feet, and the last one then is an image that we've been using to illustrate what 100 feet might look like. This again being a building that some people may recognize. This is in Middleton. And this is an office building, and I think it's a little taller than the 100 feet. But still, in terms of a building that isn't, that's kind of standing by itself at that height, this gives you some sense of that height. So I would say, Mayor, that this is that 65 was a judgment call about what would be an appropriate height that would be more palatable to some.
Okay. At some point, because I don't expect you to know this evening necessarily, but it'd be nice to know what the heights of some of the structures at Epic are, at least the maximum height of some of them on their campus.
Okay.
Questions, comments? Any questions or comments on the neighborhood plan? You want to go on then, Jason?
Sure. Second category, green space and Ice Age Trail corridor. The main thing that was discussed several times was the fact that we hadn't mapped or provided for in policy in the plan a a dimension of any kind for space that would be around that trail as a sort of as a buffer. And the Ice Age Trail Foundation's best practice encouragement is that there be a buffer of several hundred feet so that the experience of hiking the trail is better than simply walking by the backs of homes. And so we took that into consideration and have suggested that we could add to the plan a recommendation that there be a 300-foot buffer at the along the north edge of the planning area that would connect through to the planned connection point, which is, I don't have an exact dimension, but it's several parcels to the west for the eventual connection of the trail through there. And more generally then about green space, we explained that there will be more park space if and as this area develops. The area that is now open farmland would have more park space than shown, but we didn't try to predetermine its location. However, we also heard discussion about wanting to be sure that that the existing woodlands and steep slopes are preserved. And so the suggestion is that we could show in the plan that those woodlands that are on the moraine there at the east side of the planning area could be specifically mapped out as protected green space, and also the option of showing a path connection through those lands to connect from the Ice Age Trail down to PD. So those are the two suggestions there. Take comments or questions on that.
Any questions or comments there? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think both of those ideas are bad ideas. And the reason I say that is, I don't know who comes up with what a best practice is for a trail and what people should or shouldn't be able to look at while they're hiking. But a 300-foot buffer is a taking. I mean, this is developable property. And for the government to come in and say, we're going to take a huge swath of this and essentially take it away and diminish the value of that property and say you can't do anything on it because, hikers are going to be finicky about what they look at while they're walking on a trail. No, I think that's a really bad policy. And similarly, I'm all in favor of woodland, and one of the things that I really like about development in this area is that it offers an opportunity to do some development and some housing in our city in a heavily wooded area, and that's not a type of housing that we really can offer in very many locations. And so the idea of saying we're going to take that, all of those acres of wooded lands that would be really desirable and say, let's put them off limits as a environmental corridor or whatever it would be. I think that not only is that a missed opportunity to diversify the type of housing we have in our city, it's a huge missed opportunity to grow our tax base. And again, it's a taking. I mean, it would be a government taking. I don't think that the city owns that land. So to take somebody else's property and say, this is off limits and you can't develop it, you've just ruined the value of their property. There's no way I could support that.
Go ahead, Jason.
If I could add a couple notes in relation to that. The current owners of the property that would be most affected by the buffer spoke in favor of that, which is one of the reasons that we felt it was acceptable to go forward with that. But point heard. And
were they planning on donating the land? Or did they want somebody to buy it and then have nobody develop it?
Surely they do. want someone to buy it. I'm just telling you what we've heard in the process. To clarify point 2, the intent there is to show as green corridor that which is undevelopable because it's too steep to develop. So that would be a change of limited consequence from the concerns that you're raising, but could be of some benefit to those on council that are paying attention to that.
Other questions or comments on this section of Jason's memo? Mr. Lytle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confess to being one member who's coming up to speed on this neighborhood plan behind some of the others, but Adam, or maybe you can refresh my memory in terms of what existing connectivity there is to other segments of the Ice Age Trail that this particular portion would connect to.
Sure. So, Adam, if you could bring up one of the land use maps. All of these maps, yeah, that one that you had was good. The land use maps show the existing trail as it comes through the golf course and lands basically at the top of the hill on Woods Road. And I don't think we're seeing a mapped route for its connection further to the west and to the north, but basically the anticipated route is that it would connect where you see that coming in at Woods Road. It would go to the west through that first 40 acres, and I think have to go then through the Curlick property, and then somewhere in there it's going to head north. The city of Madison has acquired a property that it would connect through, and so eventually it would get up to, I apologize, I'm blanking on the east-west road that is Midtown. Thank you. So that's the route that it would connect.
Anything further, Mr. Lytle? Other questions on this portion? If not, we'll move to the next section. Jason, please.
Yep, so the final category of is affordable housing, and I think half the council members brought this up individually as something that they're concerned about. I quoted here for you the language that's in the plan right now, which I would boil down to saying we're aware that this is an issue of concern, and market forces are going to guide what happens. That's kind of my boiled down version. So there's no real policy here saying here's what we're going to do to promote affordable housing. A couple of suggestions for things that might be added in response to this concern. One is that you could specifically indicate that you would support the use of tax credits for managing affordability. So when tax credits are used to help fund a project, a certain portion of the units need to be income qualified renters. So these would be rental units in most cases, tax credit supported projects. So that's one option. The other option, item 2 here, is that you could add a statement supporting the work of private organizations that promote affordability in the owner-occupied market, such as Habitat for Humanity, which has projects going in multiple communities around the county every year to build housing, affordable owner-occupied housing.
Questions or comments on this portion? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, when I think about what the purpose of a neighborhood plan is, I just don't see the policy decision about whether or not the city should subsidize housing, or whether that's even a good idea, or whether history has shown us time and time again that that's a failed model. I just don't think it belongs in a neighborhood plan at all. I think that's a separate policy decision for the city council to make. But since some alders are apparently bringing it up and asking the city council for feedback, I guess I would say I just don't. I think that what the language that's in the plan is, as it is adequate. I couldn't agree more that the market determines the price of housing, and it's, history has shown us it's difficult, if not impossible, for government to try and make some, take what the market bears and somehow make it more affordable to people who can't afford what the market bears. But I think, one of the idea of affordable housing, although it sounds good and it's, it feels good, and it's, maybe it's a good thing for campaign literature. The idea that we don't have affordable housing in Verona, I think, is a misnomer in the first place. And I think if the plan defines affordable housing, and I think it's a lot of people define it as 30% of income. And if you look at the median income in Verona, according to the Census Bureau, it's something on the order of like 87,000 or something is the median household income. Maybe it's 82,000, I forget. But at any rate, when you do the math on that, it's about $2,200 a month is what should be affordable housing in Verona. And if you look at the Census Bureau's 2015 data, the median monthly housing cost for owner-occupied housing in the city was $1,790, which is substantially below that 30% threshold. And the monthly renter-occupied housing cost in Verona, city of Verona, in 2015 was $1,008. So I think, we've already got affordable housing. I don't think we need to put in a comprehensive plan some kind of further definition of affordable housing or talk about doing tax credits or some other subsidy for affordable housing. I think that's a debate that just belongs somewhere other than a neighborhood plan.
Other questions or comments? I'll just weigh in a little bit. I couldn't agree with Mr. Manley more. It really bothers me when we have people out there who are trying to confuse the public by talking about affordable housing when it really is low-income subsidized housing. I lived here since 1993, and I've never had a constituent approach me and say that we want low-income housing in the city. And if we can't learn from the mistakes of many other municipalities, we can have example after example after example. That is not what makes Hometown USA. So I think we should call it what it is. It's not affordable housing, it's low-income housing, number one. Number two, when I think of affordable housing, I think it's something that we did as a council last year when we had the ability that the city portion of the property taxes were reduced 10%. That impacts every property taxpayer in the city of Wisconsin, city of Verona, including the business properties. So we shouldn't try and confuse the public by saying that this is affordable housing or we're going to make affordable housing for everybody. That sounds good, but that's not really what it is. We have to take a look at the issues that come along with affordable housing or low-income housing. And when we talk about this project or any other project in the city, as a plan commission, as a council, we're always talking about the quality of the project. And we're always asking the developers and the contractors and the builders and property owners to do more and more and more. And I think rightfully so. And we've been recognized by many people as that we have raised the bar in the city of Verona. And this to me would be a step backwards. And I do not think that the city should be requiring that of any developer, not only in this project or in this neighborhood plan, but anywhere in the city. That's not what people in the city want. That's something that other people are pushing us to have in Verona because they don't want them all centrally located in one other location. And I will continue to fight as hard as I possibly can that we do not, as a city, require low-income housing. Any additional questions or comments? Questions, comments, feedback? Mr. Lytle, please.
Are you asking for comments specific to the memo or comments in general around the neighborhood plan?
Anything on the neighborhood plan? Mr. Lytle?
Can I ask Mr. Sayre to sort of summarize the materials that were distributed just now? It looks like there were summaries and particularly this list of people and addresses that were distributed.
Mr. Sayre,
That
please.
was submitted by the applicant. To be honest, I got it around 4 o'clock today. I haven't taken a close look at it, but my understanding is there's a letter from, I think, one of their development partners for the Legend Edge project. There's a couple letters in there from the developer, kind of just explaining their project, and then I believe the list is from a petition of people that have signed to support the Legends Edge project. And then the larger bound material was submitted as well, and I was asked to share that with the Plan Commission. That's the Legends Edge project.
Mr. Lytle?
Yeah, so I following on from that, obviously I haven't looked through this material, but in general, I believe it's quite important for Verona to develop a plan for the Northwest neighborhood. I do believe it should consider overall needs of the community and not be geared specifically towards one development proposal. The development proposal for the first phase of this neighborhood is, of course, quite striking in many ways, and I'm interested in exploring that further, having a better understanding of how that would or wouldn't fit with the character of the city and existing conditions. I feel like the majority of the feedback we've received to date has been from residents in the town, which is of course a very important perspective for us to gain. But to date, I'm not aware of much significant input from the rest of the city of Verona, which, however, we can incorporate that through perhaps a listening session, perhaps something at the senior center or here at City Center. Around affordable housing, I don't know that I agree with every comment made, but I do think if affordable housing, whatever we're going to call it, is important to the city, that's something that should be addressed citywide, not in a neighborhood plan. I understand if there's folks wanting to play a bit of catch up, but I think in many ways the problems you create by doing it in a too tactical of a way create all kinds of issues down the road for other developments and proposals that come before us. So I think it would be great to see the city put a very thoughtful process together to look at the housing stock, to look at what other communities are doing to improve the availability of affordable or supported housing. But I think in terms of a neighborhood plan, I would agree what's in here is sufficient. Finally, speaking as someone whose backyard abuts the Ice Age Trail, I do think it's important to contribute to that. I think it's a driver of economic development and tourism to our area. As the trail is expanded, that will just increase. But my backyard to at least the segment of the Ice Age Trail that we're a part of is about 15 feet, and it doesn't seem to be impeding folks' enjoyment of that or our enjoyment of the property. So I think there's a wide variability of the type of preservation that we could have out there to ensure that Verona maximizes on this natural resource that is there without trying to devote huge swaths of land to it.
Thank you, Mr. Lytle. Other questions or comments? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify my prior comments on the affordable housing, I've got the numbers from the Census Bureau, just so that people know what they are, because I couldn't remember them off the top of my head. The median household income in the city of Verona is $87,286. So at the 30% definition of affordable housing, 30% or less of your income going toward housing, that would be $2,182 a month. As I said before, the median for owner occupied is $1,790, and the median for renter occupied housing is $1,008. So we're substantially below from a median standpoint. Also worth noting that from a renter occupied housing standpoint, according to the Census Bureau, 20% of the renters in the city of Verona have a household income of $25,000 or less. That tells me, and that's out of a total renting population of 1,616 units. So that, so that's 20%, is well over 300 units of renter occupied housing in our city that people making $25,000 a year or less are occupying. We clearly have that available in our city right now. The idea that we don't have housing options available for people who make less than median is just simply incorrect.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Also, as I mentioned before, when we took a look at the city reducing the property taxes by 10% last year because of the closing of the Epic TIF, according to the State Journal, when they do the annual analysis of what the property tax rates are, I believe it came out in January, that Verona was the second lowest city in the county as far as when you compare apples to apples. Verona was the second lowest city in the county as far as what our property taxes were. That to me is that's affordable housing, when you can keep those taxes lower and actually reduce taxes. So the city certainly did our job there. Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. Jason, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I guess just if we can get maybe a little more clarification. I mean, obviously we took this to the council for feedback. I think the big items Jason kind of hit on that we heard about was the green space, the affordable housing, and then the heights and densities. I guess we're looking for direction tonight of, we want to bring this back to the Plan Commission, and we want to bring back something that hopefully that can move forward here. So I guess any feedback you can provide, if you can't, want to give it some thought, if you can email me, but we're looking for that feedback so we can get some direction, because right now it'd be tough for us to go forward with any changes in this because we're not hearing it tonight. So that's, I guess, anything you can provide us relating to the heights, the densities, the green space, the affordable housing, because those are the big takeaways we had at that council meeting that this committee this body wanted to kind of go to and come back. So if you want to get some thought, great. If you have now, even better.
Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam, could you just set forth for me what the process is or the next steps are to the point at which the neighborhood plan is approved?
Well, ultimately we did take forward a draft to this body. We held the public hearing. Action was deferred, but we were directed to go to the council, get comments and feedback. Based upon the feedback, that's why we're here tonight, kind of just summarizing potential changes that could be made based upon the comments and feedback from the council. If we start making changes to this plan, my belief is we'd have to hold another public hearing, just because I think some of the changes we've talked about tonight especially are pretty substantial in my mind. So we'd have to notice that for 30 days as required by statute, hold a public hearing before the Plan Commission. Most likely that would be in December, if that's the case. And then at that point, the Plan Commission would review and then make a recommendation to the Common Council. And the Common Council would have the ability to act on that and potentially adopt it. So where we're at right now is looking to know, are we making changes, are we not making changes? And if we are, which changes, and the more explicit, the better. I think we've gotten some good feedback on the affordable housing component. We've gotten some great feedback on the green space as well too. I think the one that really has been touched on yet has been the density and the height. So any comments on that would be appreciated.
And I'll go down that list. On the height and then the density, for me, it always has been the quality of the buildings. So I want to keep an open mind on that. And the quality of the buildings is number one to me. That will determine how high I'm willing to go on density and on the height. As far as the green space, certainly I want to protect the Ice Age Trail as well. I think there needs to be a balance between the 300 feet and what exists there now, and I think that can be accomplished. I haven't heard anyone say that they don't want to protect the Ice Age Trail, but I think 300 feet is excessive. And as long as I have the opportunity to talk about low-income housing one more time, it has absolutely no place whatsoever in the neighborhood plan. I can make it clearer if you want, but
Wait, I'm not sure.
Mr. Manley?
Thank you. I've talked about density and building height at other meetings where we've reviewed the plan, but I'll say again that, first of all, I agree with the mayor that, density, the quality of the development and the materials used and architecture can go a long way toward, density and height concerns. I think a great example of that is the item on the agenda prior for the downtown redevelopment. And I think I'm with the mayor in that I think multifamily housing is being overbuilt. But when, for a project that's in the right location and of the right character, you can look past that. But I think with this particular neighborhood, when we look at the uses that are existing right there, and if the idea is truly to preserve somewhat of the rural character of the area, it would be it'd have to be an awfully special project, to my thinking, to be looking at really, really high densities and really, really tall buildings. I just don't know how you differentiate between Verona and Madison, which I think is important for us as a city to do. I think it's important for us to have an identity that's different than the city of Madison. And I think it's difficult to do that if we say that we're going to allow the intensity of development that you typically see in Madison. And so, maybe the best approach is to not mention anything specifically in the plan. Don't write a specific number in on density. Don't write a specific number in on height. And that will allow the Plan Commission and the Common Council in the future to evaluate the appropriateness of density and height on a case-by-case basis when they're actually presented with an actionable development plan.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Additional questions or comments? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you. I'll address first the height and the density. And I think it would be reasonable not to include, well, first of all, I agree in part with what the mayor said and what Mr. Manley said. Case-by-case basis, there are going to be circumstances at which greater density and higher buildings would be appropriate, and those in which they're not. I think it would be reasonable not to include specific numbers in the neighborhood plan, unless, unless there would be developers who would be making decisions as to projects that would then subsequently have a project that has greater density and height than was anticipated when some of the first buildings were built. So I think I can see the benefit of not including those numbers. I disagree with Mr. Manley, though, in connection with types of buildings that can be incorporated into this area. And I think that it was probably about a year ago, maybe back in November, that I expressed this opinion that in this part of Verona that is currently separated from all residential neighborhoods, is bordered by 2 gravel pits, and across the street from Epic, which has some remarkable buildings that do take into account and are built very nicely into the natural world that exists there. That I can see that there would be some opportunity to have a dense project that is built reasonably in this area. We already have 10,000, I'm not sure what the visits are, but we already have a great deal of traffic that's going into Epic every day. And I drive 9 Mountain Road and PD every day, and with I do not find it to be an overwhelming difficulty. And so I'm not as concerned, I guess, with density as some others might be.
Thank you, Mr. Heinzen. Mr. Lytle, please.
Yeah, it's pretty striking to have driven past the McKee Road and Good Shepherd all these years, and to picture something like that out there, especially when the city of Verona hasn't grown that far north yet. As such, I totally understand neighbors in that area having huge concerns about something like this going in. I think I would feel exactly the same way. I think, as I stated earlier, it's vitally important for the city to be thinking about this now and to establish what we believe are reasonable expectations, but also not encouraging in 2 years from now this property to be developed into a highly dense, tall bunch of buildings. I think all of that is premature to either say yes to or no to right now. And with that in mind, I mean, just thinking about what the area of Epic was 15 years ago when it was first brought out as something coming to Verona, that was a huge transition for that part of the city, and involved some significant changes to the landscape. But specific to your comments or requests for comments, I do think the neighborhood plan would benefit from erring on the more general side of things when it comes to height and density. And if we want to keep the density and heights lower for now, to give us a comfort level that we're not going to wrongly encourage some crazy levels of development out there that don't make sense with the character and the growth patterns of the city, then I'm fine with that. All of us understanding that over time, the way we view that part of the town, I guess, right now, could change as the north neighborhood is built out, as Epic becomes more finalized, if that ever happens with Epic, in terms of their footprint. So yeah, the feedback would be more general in both density and building height, and similar to the comments I had previously about preservation of natural features.
Thank you, Mr. Lytle. Any additional comments? If not, we appreciate your feedback on that. Jason, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we are on agenda item 10, which is discussion regarding a zoning text amendment relating to an in-vehicle sales or service land use drive-through. Mr. Sarah, please.
Thank you. This is on the agenda for discussion only. There is no action on this item tonight. But city staff is requesting feedback and direction from the Plan Commission regarding potential zoning text amendment that would amend our drive-through standards in the city. Concerns have been raised by citizens and elected officials in regards to the type of development that has occurred along East Verona Avenue. Specifically, concerns have been raised about the number of drive-through establishments, fast food establishments, and the impact that's having on the city's hometown USA feel. In response to these comments, planning staff has researched other communities to determine how communities regulate drive-through uses. So in your packet, there's a memo kind of outlining what the city has in place right now and what other municipalities have in place as well. Currently in the city, in-vehicle sales and service is what we call a drive-through use. That is a conditional use in the suburban office, neighborhood commercial, suburban commercial, urban commercial, and central commercial zoning districts. There are no districts that permit these by right. They're all currently a CUP, and there's also a variety of standards listed under those involving stacking distances beyond and behind the windows themselves. So we did look at a variety of ones throughout the country. I'm not going to outline those for you, but there's a variety of ways that other municipalities regulate drive-through uses. Some options include, we did find some that actually prohibit them outright. We have some that restrict them to certain zones, similar to what we do right now. We restrict those uses to the zones that I identified previously. There's also some places that have looked at a potential like density-based formula to it. So you could have X amount of drive-throughs within a certain distance of an area. So you, for example, you could have 2 drive-throughs in a 500-foot radius. You know, that's one of the examples as well that we have found. I think the key to whatever we do is going to be the definition of how we, if we do make any modifications of how we define a drive-through, specifically looking at, you know, the drive-through windows, but also looking at drop boxes. Is that technically a drive-through? An ATM is technically a drive-through. Hotels, dropping people off at hotels. If there's a drop-off area, is that a drive-through or is that not a drive-through? You know, so items we need to consider as well that we may not be thinking about now. Looking at drive-through doctors, that's always a potential of in the future. You never know where that's going. Drive-through voting. I don't know if Holly would like that, but that's always an option that, you know, you never know what's going to come up. Childcare drop-off, dog daycare drop-off. That's a conversation that can always happen. So just bigger picture kind of looking at this. Also in the memo, we did outline existing drive-throughs that we identified in the city. There's a variety of them, obviously, ranging from public institutional land uses. The library has a drop-off drive-through, obviously. A variety of restaurants, Walgreens, cleaners with their dry cleaning, and then obviously financial institutions. So staff is requesting feedback tonight from the Plan Commission. I think the options that we've initially identified here are, 1, we can do nothing, keep the existing ordinance in place as is. 2, prohibit drive-throughs in specific districts or areas. That's similar to what we do right now. 3, limit drive-throughs on a density basis. Once again, 1 drive-through for a specific distance. 4, allow drive-throughs for only specific businesses or restrict them for specific businesses. That could be banks, pharmacies, restaurants. Or 5, just prohibit drive-throughs outright. Staff has no opinion on this, to be honest with you. I think we're looking for direction tonight. We've heard feedback over the years regarding this. I think the initial feedback we heard was concerns more about the fast food orientation of the businesses that have occurred on East Verona Avenue. We looked into that type of ordinance as well, and those ordinances are very challenging if they even consider that. You get into details such as silverware and paper versus ceramic type plates. So this was kind of the feeling, at least from staff, if we're going to have this conversation, the better conversation to have would be relating to looking at the drive-throughs overall. My one comment is, as we look at making any changes to something like this, just be cautious of if you put limits on something, we may be in a position in the future that we may be kicking ourselves if we restrict them too much, that we may really have a use we like, and I'm not sure what that would be, but we could have a use that we like, and maybe we've put restrictions in place that now we can't allow that. So I'd like to hear your feedback and comments on this. I know other elected officials have asked for that as well from the Plan Commission too, so I would appreciate any comments you have or any suggestions as well too. So thank you.
Any feedback for Mr. Sayre? Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam, do you get the sense that the concern is really about the drive-throughs as in contrast to just the number of fast food restaurants that are found along East Verona Avenue?
Sure. So the conversation initially started about looking at a franchise-based density type ordinance. To be short about that is we had our city attorney basically advise us that that's not legal to do. You can't legally do that. I think as we looked at is if there is a concern out there with types of uses, I think the uses stem from places that you can quickly get food and establishments of that, and potentially a public safety issues. If you do have too many drive-throughs in one area, does that create a public safety issue when it comes to traffic and movements? I think some of the concerns are probably preference based. I mean, you know, I'm sure all of you have as well, have spoken to people in town, and you can talk to a few people and some people say they don't like something in the city, and other people say, I think it's the greatest thing ever. So I think that there's some of that going on as well too, but I think initially started off from the franchise standpoint, I think if the city wants to consider this, I think as we spoke with our legal counsel, the best way to explore this of looking at limitations would be the drive-through aspect, because we do it already, and clearly there's potential public safety argument that could be made, and there's also a argument that could be made that certain districts, it's not appropriate from a character and design standpoint.
Go ahead, Mr. Heinzen.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Of the choices that you have identified here, these options, my sense is that we continue to work like we have over the years, which I guess would be a combination of 1 and 2. I think it's unreasonable to prohibit drive-throughs outright, if not impossible, and I think identifying specific businesses. It'd be hard to imagine an ordinance that would not allow drive-throughs for fast food restaurants, but would for pharmacies and the banks and so forth. And so if that's really if that's what folks are interested in, I think that it is not practical to do that. And in my view, so I guess the only other one that's on here is number 3, but in my view, it would be a benefit to the city to have if there's going to be restaurants with drive-throughs, to the extent that we can have them near each other so that they're not spread out all across the city. Personally, I think it would be better to do it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Heinzen. Other comments? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, clearly this is a group of people who don't want fast food in our city. And I think that if we had an ordinance in place 10 years ago that says you can't have a drive-through in the city of Verona, would we not, would we have, for the 6 restaurants, the 6 fast food restaurants who have a drive-through, does anybody reasonably think that we would have ended up with 6 regular old restaurants, sit-down restaurants? I mean, of course we wouldn't. The reason why we have fast food restaurants with drive-throughs is because that's what the market bore. I think personally, I'd love to have more restaurants in Verona, including sit-down restaurants. If that's what we want, then we need to plan for the type of growth in our city that will cause somebody who wants to invest in a restaurant to come here and build. That's a much better way of addressing this issue than trying to ban drive-throughs. I mean, I can tell you as somebody who's got 3 kids that McDonald's or Arby's or Taco Bell have been a lifesaver every once in a while. I think that, especially if you've got small kids, it's not easy to pack up a kid in a car seat and bring them into a restaurant and order and then get the food and then get the kids back into the car seat. I think drive-throughs are a convenience, and they're something that I think it makes sense for us to be able to allow to consider. And, I think we require a conditional use permit for drive-throughs. So that's a great way of ensuring that we have control over how many and where, because the Plan Commission and the City Council can make decisions on a case-by-case basis whether something with a drive-through makes sense to be in our city at all or to be in our city at a specific location. And I guess I would just urge in favor of allowing us to continue to have that flexibility and make decisions on a case-by-case basis as opposed to a across-the-board prohibition.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Other comments? Mr. Lytle, please.
Adam, if you're looking for feedback, option 1.
I'll give my feedback. I think that this ordinance is or the text amendment change is absolutely unnecessary. For me, it goes back even farther when Adam talked about the original intent was to eliminate chains. If you don't like the chains, just don't go. If I want to go home tonight, if I want to stop at McDonald's or Culver's or Arby's, restaurants that Mr. Manley mentioned, I can stop. If I don't want to stop, if I don't want to support a chain, I don't. I probably buy 98% of my gas is at Quick Trip. Quick Trip is a chain. They're a Wisconsin-based chain, and I like to use them because I think they do a great job. So I think this is absolutely unnecessary, and option 1, I'm supportive of that. Any additional comment? Seeing none, we are on agenda item 11, reports and comments from Planning Department and update on development projects. Mr. Sayre, please.
Sure, I'm passing around right now just an updated development sheet. We didn't have time to get that into the packet. Of note, the Sugar Creek Commons project was approved by the council last month. A couple other projects on the docket here just to bring up. Legacy at Knoll Manor, I think there's a good chance it's coming back within the next month or two. I know the developer is working on that. Festival Foods as well. I think there's a good chance that's going to come back in November too, or at the November meeting. Hometown Grove subdivision, houses are going up. We're issuing permits for that. Tailwaggers, the dog daycare down in the technology park, that is getting very close to having occupancy granted, so that's very close to being kind of done. And then finally, the Velocity project at 142 Paola, I know we've talked about that before. They are requesting permits, so that is getting closer to starting. They're working with the city engineer to work through a few punch items on the list of the stormwater management plan, but that is getting very close to getting started. I think there's a backhoe out there, somebody told me. Kettle Creek North, they're putting in roads for that. Their intention is to have houses start going up before the end of the year. I don't know. Pardon me?
Are the roads in?
No, they're putting utilities in, but the goal is to get some permits issued to start putting basements in before the year is out. So they're up there working away pretty hard.
They need to get roads in before they can.
They do, yeah. So they gotta get the roads done, then we'll pull the permits. So that's my update. Just one last thing is we are working with a student from the UW. The city purchased the pit on the east side of Northern Lights Road a couple years ago. We're working with an undergrad student in the UW landscaping architecture program just to help us put together a plan to kind of see how that gets filled, and whenever it does get filled, just how that's going to lay out from a use standpoint of recreation type uses, what the city needs in that area, anything that Epic might need in that area, but just putting together a plan of, as we fill that pit, we can hopefully fill it the correct way and be set up ready to go with however that property gets used. It was identified as open space in our North Neighborhood Plan, so we'll see what she can come up with, but there's a good chance she'll be before the Plan Commission or potentially the Park Board sometime late this year, early next year. So that's all I have.
All right, Mr. Heinzen, please.
Sure. Adam, could you just, I guess, refresh my recollection on the West End mixed use?
Yeah, that's the Steve Brown apartment project that was on the north side of where the existing apartment buildings are. So that was about 14,000 square feet of commercial, and they had, I think, 29 unit apartment building and then 8 townhouses. So the front side would have been commercial, the back side was going to be apartments, and then also townhouses next to the apartments.
That's right along Verona Road.
Verona, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Other questions for Mr. Sayre? Go ahead, Mr. Lytle.
Just clarifying, we are on agenda item 11, 12,
We're
some
on 11
combination.
right now.
Okay. Mine's probably, well, 11A. The progress on the county facility, it seemed like there was a lot of things happening at the beginning of the summer and virtually nothing else other than some really big machinery parked there now on Nesbitt.
The salt shed?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's DOT's salt shed.
Sorry.
So I noticed that today. I saw they had a bunch of signs up and a bunch of trucks moving again out there. I don't have an update. We can look into that and I can get back to you next month. I'm not sure if Mr. McCorsky remembers the timeline for that project. I don't remember what the timeline was for that, but that's actually in DOT right away. So the town didn't have to approve, or couldn't approve it, neither could we. So, but it'll be a salt shed. But I'll see what I can find out.
Okay, we are on agenda item 12, reports and comments from Plan Commission commissioners. Anything to report, any of us? I was just looking ahead at the November meeting, would be November 6th. And since we're short one person on the Plan Commission, the three of you, do you know of any conflicts that you would not be here? November 6th is the first Monday. All right, so we will definitely plan on November 6th then for the next meeting. With that, there's no other business before us. A motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Lytle, seconded by Mr. Heinzen. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.